What if you answered a desperate cry for help in the middle of the ocean, only to find an entire ship of dead men, with no wounds, no blood, and every single face frozen in a silent scream, staring up at the sky? The ocean is vast, it is ancient, and it is entirely unforgiving. For as long as humanity has dared to build vessels and push out into the dark, rolling expanse of the sea, the waters have kept their secrets. We tell tales of rogue waves, of monstrous leviathans, and of storms that swallow galleons whole. But those are the dangers we can comprehend. They are the physical, tangible risks of the maritime world. But what happened in the summer of 1947 defies all logic, all reason, and all physical explanation. It is a story that has baffled maritime historians, haunted sailors, and frustrated investigators for over 70 years. It is the story of a distress call that should never have been sent, a rescue mission that turned into a nightmare, and a ship that officially never existed. It was late June, 1947. The waters of the Strait of Malacca, heavily traveled, narrow shipping route wedged between Indonesia and Malaysia, were relatively calm. The sun was beating down with intense, oppressive heat. Several ships, a mix of British and American trade vessels and naval listening posts, were navigating the strait, going about their routine business in the aftermath of the Second World War. Then, the radios across the strait violently cracked to life. A distress call cut through the static, and immediately, the operators listening knew something was terribly wrong. This wasn't a standard, rhythmic S.O.S. The Morse code was erratic, frantic, tapped out by hands that were either inexperienced or trembling with an uncontrollable terror. Multiple Allied listening posts and ships scrambled to triangulate the signal. When the frantic tapping was finally translated, the message sent a cold shiver down the spine of every radio man who read it. It was a fragmented, terrified transmission from a Dutch freighter, identifying itself as the SS Ourang Medan. The message read, "S.O.S. from Ourang Medan. We float. All officers, including captain, are dead in chart room and bridge. Possibly whole crew dead." This horrific update was followed by a long, agonizing wave of meaningless static. The radio operators listening across the strait held their breath, waiting for clarification, for coordinates, for anything. Then, a few moments later, the erratic Morse code returned for one final, chilling transmission. It wasn't a plea for help. It was a statement. Just 2 words. "I'd die." After those 2 words, the frequency went entirely dead. No further signals were broadcast. No response came to the frantic, repeated hails from the surrounding ships. Among the vessels that intercepted that harrowing distress call was an American merchant ship named the Silver Star. By triangulating the radio signal with the help of Dutch and British listening posts, the captain of the Silver Star realized they were the closest vessel to the coordinates. Without hesitation, he ordered a hard change of course. They were going to find the Ourang Medan. They were going to save whoever, or whatever, was left on board. The journey took several tense hours. The crew of the Silver Star prepared for a disaster, perhaps a pirate attack, a brutal mutiny, or a catastrophic mechanical failure. But nothing could have prepared them for what was actually drifting in the currents ahead. As the Silver Star pulled alongside the Ourang Medan, the American crew crowded the deck. They called out, with heavy megaphones. They blew the ship's massive horn, a sound loud enough to wake the dead. There was no answer. There was no movement on the sun-baked wooden deck. The strangest part was the condition of the ship. The Ourang Medan looked completely, perfectly undamaged. The hull was intact without a single scrape. The lifeboats were still firmly and neatly secured in their davits, untouched. From the outside, it was a perfectly healthy, fully operational, commercial vessel. But it was completely, utterly silent. The only sound was the water lapping against the steel hull. The captain of the Silver Star assembled a boarding party. Armed, cautious, and deeply unsettled, a small team of American sailors lowered a lifeboat and rowed across the narrow gap of water toward the silent freighter. As the first American boots stepped over the railing and onto the deck of the Ourang Medan, the air itself seemed to shift. The intense tropical heat remained, but a profound sense of dread washed over the boarding party. The radio operator's S.O.S. message had been terrifyingly accurate. The crew was dead, all of them. But it wasn't just that they were dead, it was how they had died. The bodies of the Dutch crew were scattered haphazardly across the deck, lying exactly where they had fallen. But as the Americans approached them, weapons drawn, they realized there was no blood. There were no bullet wounds, no stab marks, no bludgeoning. There were absolutely no signs of a struggle or a frantic fight for survival against a human enemy. Instead, every single corpse was locked in a state of rapid, extreme rigor mortis. They were frozen like horrific statues. Their arms were outstretched, rigid in front of them, hands clawing frantically at empty space, as if trying to push away or fend off something completely invisible. And their faces, Their eyes were wide open, bulging practically out of their sockets. Their mouths were stretched open in silent, gaping screams that stretched their jaws to the breaking point. Every man on that deck had died looking up at the sky, or staring dead ahead at something approaching them. The sheer, unadulterated terror etched into their frozen, sun-baked features unnerved even the most hardened combat veterans in the American boarding party. As the men forced themselves to move deeper into the ship, the nightmare only escalated. They climbed to the bridge. They found the captain, exactly as the message said, dead. His eyes wide, his hands gripping the air, his face a mask of absolute agony. In the wheelhouse, the helmsman was dead, twisted away from the ship's wheel. In the chart room, the officers were dead, sprawled over maps. They found the communications room. Slumped over the desk was the radio operator, the very man who had sent that final, haunting message. His lifeless fingers were still resting heavily on the telegraph key. His eyes, like all the others, were wide with a paralyzing fear. Even the ship's dog, a small terrier, was found dead on the deck. It was frozen mid-snarl, its teeth bared violently at an enemy that wasn't there. When the search party descended into the lower decks and the boiler room, they experienced something entirely defying the laws of nature. The ambient temperature outside in the Strait of Malacca was well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The boiler room of a steel ship in the sun should have been an absolute oven. Instead, the American sailors reported feeling a deep, unnatural chill. They shivered uncontrollably, their breath frosting in the air, as they examined the bodies of the engineering crew, all dead, all bearing that exact same expression of horrific, blinding agony. Whatever had swept through the Ourang Medan had killed instantly. It had killed silently, and it had killed without leaving a single physical mark. The captain of the Silver Star heard the reports from his boarding party and made a swift decision. They had to bring the Ourang Medan back to port. The authorities needed to investigate this immediately. Medical examiners needed to see these bodies. The world needed to know what had happened here. The boarding party hastily attached a heavy, braided steel tow line to the bow of the ghost ship, connecting it securely to the stern of the Silver Star. The Americans worked quickly, desperate to get off that cursed deck as fast as humanly possible. They returned to their ship. The massive diesel engines roared to life, and the tow cable pulled taut, lifting out of the water. But the Ourang Medan was not meant to reach the shore. Almost as soon as the towing began, a frantic shout rang out from the deck of the Silver Star. Thick, acrid smoke was pouring aggressively out of the Ourang Medan's No. 4 cargo hold. The smoke grew instantly violent, turning from a light gray to a choking, unnatural pitch black. Within seconds, it became terrifyingly clear that the ship was on the verge of a catastrophic fire. Fearing the intense fire would travel up the tow line, or that an explosion would take both ships down, the captain of the Silver Star ordered the cable cut immediately. Axes swung wildly against the steel. The heavy tow line snapped with a violent crack, plunging into the ocean, severing the physical tie between the living and the dead. They were just in time. With a concussive force that shook the ocean itself, the Ourang Medan exploded. The blast was so incredibly violent, it lifted the massive steel freighter entirely out of the water. When the shattered, burning remains of the ship slammed back down into the sea, it rapidly began taking on water. In a matter of minutes, the Ourang Medan slipped beneath the rolling waves, plunging down into the dark, crushing depths of the ocean floor. It took all the evidence, all the bodies, and all its dark secrets, down with it. What really happened on the Ourang Medan? Because the ship sank before any formal, scientific investigation could take place, we are left only with theories. Some are grounded in the dark, classified military history of the era. Others push the boundaries of what we consider reality. The most prominent theory revolves around chemical weapons. At the end of World War II, highly classified and incredibly dangerous chemical and biological weapons were being secretly transported across the globe. Many researchers believe the Ourang Medan was a smuggler's ship, illegally hired to transport leftover volatile nerve gas, possibly tabun or sarin, or perhaps even illicit biological agents created by the notorious Japanese unit 731. If salt water had leaked into the cargo hold and reacted with poorly stored chemical canisters, a silent, odorless cloud of lethal gas could have rapidly swept through the ventilation system. Nerve gas causes intense muscle spasms and asphyxiation, which perfectly explains the frozen, clawing hands, the lack of wounds, and the terrified expressions. And, eventually, those volatile chemicals ignited, causing the massive explosion. Others point to natural, environmental phenomena. The seafloor in that specific region is known for heavy seismic activity. A massive, sudden fissure could have released a giant bubble of noxious, highly concentrated methane gas. As the bubble surfaced right under the ship, it would have suffocated the crew instantly, pushing the oxygen completely out of the air. Methane is also highly flammable, explaining the devastating explosion when it reached the engine room. But then, there's the final, most unsettling piece of the puzzle. When curious investigators and journalists began digging into official maritime registries, like the comprehensive Lloyd's Register of Shipping, to find the owners and the manifest of the Ourang Medan, they found something almost as disturbing as the dead crew. The ship didn't exist. There was no official record of a ship ever being named or registered as the Ourang Medan. There was no crew manifest, no port of departure, no destination. It was a ghost ship, in the truest, most literal sense of the word. A vessel that officially never sailed, crewed by men who officially never lived. Did a clandestine, multinational military operation cover up the very existence of the ship after their deadly, illegal cargo wiped out an entire crew? Or did the Silver Star encounter something else entirely, out there in the sweltering heat of the Malacca Strait? Something that defies chemical explanations and natural disasters. Something that terrifies men so deeply that their hearts simply stop before they can even draw a weapon. We may never know the truth. The Ourang Medan rests quietly at the bottom of the ocean, a rotting, silent tomb holding the answers deep within its shattered hull. But the final words of that terrified radio operator still echo in the history of the sea. A warning, or perhaps a simple, horrific statement of fact, from a man who saw the true face of death coming for him in the dark. I die. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, but we'll keep digging regardless. If you have your own theories on this case, I'd love to read them in the comments below. Until the next mystery, sleep well, and keep watching the dark.